Hi, welcome to our conversation, The World You Created For No Longer Exists. Thank you for having us, CADAF. My name is Dejha.
And I'm Ania Catherine. So we're going to start here at the beginning of a process and then where it's gotten to today. In January 2020, we were commissioned by ADO Brooklyn to create a new installation. And it was in response to their theme of unfluence. And what was interesting is when thinking about the referential creative economy, creative plagiarism, recycling of images, everyone needing a mood board to make a piece of work, or people expecting a mood board before they want to pay for a piece of work. We got kind of down to where does creative thinking come from and where do ideas come from?
And where does inspiration come from?
And where does inspiration come from? Right.
And the idea that inspiration isn't something that you go and get. It's not something you can achieve or acquire. It's something that happens in an open state.
For example, Pinterest says find inspiration, and there's this kind of idea that you like click and like you get inspired with the click. And what we found was really interesting is a lot of ideas, both creative ideas and ideas in technological innovation, have come when people were doing something very mundane. So it could be someone who every time they take a shower got a brilliant idea, but when they sat down at their desk to work, they couldn't think of anything. One thing we were thinking a lot about was, where are all of our empty moments? Where are those moments where we're bored and so we're zoning off, or we're imagining something? We're almost allergic or afraid of boredom and to do nothing, but actually boredom is a really rich, fertile ground for creativity, and it's also really good for you.
So we wanted to create an installation that facilitated that kind of state of boredom. We used to have to carve out time to do something, but now we have to carve out time to do nothing.
And so what we wanted to do with In Waiting, which is the name of this piece, is to carve out time for someone to sit and just exist and hopefully achieve that kind of productive boredom state.
So In Waiting is a platform of sorts. It very much has the aesthetic of a train platform. It has the aesthetic of a waiting room, and you're basically waiting for a train that never comes. There is a long ramp that leads to this dwell space, which is the main structure in which you sit, and that is living underneath the skylight, the periscope in ADO. And so we're using the natural light in conversation with that dwell space. The long ramp, this is a call out to that sort of long walk, or that empty time, that empty space that you might need to allow ideas to facilitate, or that inspiration to finally hit. So you see the basic structure here. There were some elements that aren't included, some bands that were suspending this large concrete structure, and also all of the openings, those are filled with electrochromic glass. So our approach to technology and integrating technology into this experience is very much a calm technology approach. We like to call it dwelling art versus the zeitgeist of interactive art, where you have to attend to the artwork with a wave of the hand, or this sort of one-to-one interaction, which feels a little bit more like entertainment rather than a place to dwell, a place to exist, a place to reflect. So we very much wanted to employ calm technology to create a place to dwell, not to attend to. And then above is the periscope in ADO, the skylight, which is half mirrored and half open. So what we were going to do was place the electrochromic glass in a sort of pattern cut way, where we did light studies of the ADO lobby, and we could see how the light would shift throughout the day, and we would choreograph this sort of constant refresh, driven and controlled by environment embedded sensors. So proximity sensors and ways to absorb and register how people were inhabiting the space. So again, they didn't have to do anything consciously, but their presence was affecting the environment that they were sitting in.
We didn't want people to feel the need to act in any certain way or to sit in any certain way, because we just wanted them to exist. So it was an interesting challenge to try to find out how can we make this piece responsive to the human body, and kind of have the patterns reflect what the audience participants were doing in the space without them feeling like, oh, I'm going to be rewarded if I do this or that. We wanted it to be very like almost disassociated with what they were doing, but still knowing that the patterns that were happening were related to their presence being there. So the video that you see here with the electrochromic glass shifting from opaque to transparent in a pattern, just to show you what it was like, we sped it up a little bit. So it wouldn't have been, if you were there in person and it existed, it wouldn't have been this readily visible. Like
the animation was kind of like watching paint dry, which is, you know,
which was one of the activities that was listed as a good one to get to a true board state.
After we had completed the designs, fabrication, I think it was a Friday, we were speaking to the fabricators, and with ADO, the fabrication was going to start the following Monday. Literally 20 minutes after our call had ended with the fabricators, we got the call from ADO that the exhibition was going to be postponed, and we weren't sure when it would be installed.
So the piece was postponed, but it was kind of unclear at that point when it would go live, because everyone just didn't know what was going to happen. But we did know that everyone was going to be in quarantine and self-isolating for an extended period of time. But considering this new context of people just coming out of isolation for at least a month, but as we all know, it ended up being much longer than that, we thought about where people would be emotionally, mentally, psychologically when they're re-entering the world. We imagined that day when things open up and someone's like, I'm going to go see art today or go to this great cultural institution, ADO, and thinking about what would be there, and then just knowing and understanding this, what we're calling conceptual expiration of in waiting. Because if people had just come out of months of isolation, asking them to come and sit in a room by themselves doesn't seem like it would help anyone, and it also would maybe even be triggering considering they've just been maybe in a home by themselves for months. So we knew we had to rethink our approach and come up with something that would meet people where they were as they were coming out of self-isolation and have a sensitivity to what kind of states people would be in. In rethinking what this piece could be for the New World context, it was actually kind of a psychological exercise as much as a creative one, because we really wanted to put ourselves in the shoes of people who would be going on that first day. And so we thought, okay, people might be emotionally fraught. They might have lost loved ones. They are probably dealing with job insecurity, financial stress. They're excited to be in public, but also probably a little bit scared to be close to people. But the shutdown didn't all of a sudden make what we were advocating for everyone's reality. People weren't at home in their room, dwelling in their empty thoughts, looking out the window, appreciating the birds and slowing down and listening to their inner voice. But actually we noticed a kind of shift in the other direction when everyone was put on lockdown.
So how has our use of technology changed? Has it been frivolous before? Has it been more entertainment focused? Has it been more about sort of shallow interactions and curating our personal brands on social media? And has it now shifted more into essential communication? And so how we look at technology, is that going to be more in a serious tone or a more sincere tone? Maybe not so serious, but a sincere tone. The very products that we're using just to have personal conversations, to have Zoom calls. I mean, there's real surveillance technology implications when we're talking about using technology that we really can't opt out of.
Especially in isolation, the ability, it was already difficult before to opt out of these services without, you know, moving to a remote island and having zero communication and nothing. But when your only way of having any connection with people became these digital services and apps, then
that's made us very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we see that the old structures, the digital architecture that we inhabit is built on already broken systems, and we've just been sort of editing them and trying to fix parts of them. But what really we need to do is to intentionally deconstruct the digital systems and redesign them anew. We see that the old structures are falling apart, and what appeared to be concrete is no longer longer concrete. And so this led us into the development of the next iteration of D.
And we chose D, and it has many meanings. I mean, it could mean demolish, deconstruct, decolonize.
D, formerly known as In Waiting, is a naturalistic science fiction ruin of 2020's digital architectures, as well as a literal ruin of our original installation that was never shown due to mandatory shutdowns.
We decided to take that structure, our literal installation structure, and demolish it and kind of intentionally deconstruct and pull it apart and leave that as a kind of ruin that then would make room for new life forms.
Audience participants enter D. It's a site for immersive thinking on the intentional deconstruction of digital architectures and what might replace them. The installation is composed of concrete surroundings, environment-embedded sensors that are strategically laced throughout. This very much ties to the comm technology in our first rendition of the concept In Waiting. Foliage is placed deep into the crevices and to emerge in new ways that cannot be foreseen. New life presses through seemingly impossible circumstances with a spirit echoed in this historic moment's potential for major restructuring.
Inspired by the tense and beautifully fertile inch where ruins and new life meet, D carries the tone of heavy optimism as it emerges from an intentional deconstruction. We'll keep what we want to carry forward and discard what no longer serves us. Instead of focusing on the ruins themselves, what we're more interested in is the negative space of the ruin. Now that this has been completely dismantled, what new gaps are there and what spaces have arisen for new life forms, which in our installation would have been represented by actual plant life growing through cracks in concrete and representing new life and new forms that are now able to thrive since the old systems have been demolished.
When we talk about a naturalistic science fiction ruin, this is meant to allow a site for immersive thinking, to allow us to bring ourselves maybe only into the near future, but still into the future a little bit, to allow ourselves to imagine these were old structures that we used to inhabit and we no longer do. And almost reflecting on a time where those structures did exist, but now we're sitting here with the old structures dismantled, and what are we going to do? What are we going to put in place? Who is going to design those new structures, and who should be designing them and who shouldn't be designing them, and how will it be different than last time? Now let's open it up with Anne, who was the commissioning curator for D and also the founder and curator of Alternative Thinkers.
Hi girls, great to be joining you today. I'm Anne-Laure Pingreoun, Curator of Alter Projects and Alternative Thinkers. I'm super happy that you've been talking and we're talking about In Waiting and D today, because I think it was really relevant and really kind of poignant and an important installation for audio on so many levels. It was obviously linked to the theme that we had, which was influence. We don't have enough time to think, and therefore it's actually a lot easier to copy than to create something brand new. And I think you girls, In Waiting back then were just spot on, and it was such a fresh statement, and that's why I think it's so important that we talk about it today, and how D is so key for us to capture that moment in time, because it really feels that way, and how, In Waiting was again that moment, and D basically just pay homage to what would never happen, but basically what COVID created was that In Waiting platform, a journey for all of us, because again we were looking forward to In Waiting, and obviously what ADO went through, and unfortunately ADO closing, and us, you know, continuing that conversation and keeping that project alive, and how, you know, through our conversation that became something else. And I think that is a really nice capture of what the past, I think, 4 months kind of were for all of us, where we all grew.
100%.
Yeah, we talk about In Waiting as kind of a physical manifestation of all the problems caused by the society that is kind of like just lost in these addictive interfaces and apps and nagging technology and pervasive computing, and all of that kind of created the gap that we were trying to fill, which was a moment to take a long walk and sit and dwell and be with your thoughts and not feel the need to fill those moments with activity or content. There's things interesting inside your own mind and your own thoughts that are laying undiscovered because we've been so busy looking at everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And
which kind of, I mean, from the prompt you initially gave us as the curator for the first rendition of the people In Waiting was, as you said, about influence and about the sort of referential creative economy and the whole process of it's hard to unsee, and what that does to this like hyper incessant image making culture and image consuming culture. What does that do to our creative selves that requires boredom, that requires space and time, and requires distancing from technology?
I remember the conversation, and when everyone just was told that they need to be on lockdown, we don't know how long it's going to last, and we're looking at our drawings and we're like, so maybe when people come out of this isolation, they're not going to want to come and sit in a room by themselves.
You know, obviously with COVID arriving, I was like, no one after 3 or 4 months, so I don't know how long this is going to be, is going to want to be closed in on their own, or, you know, to try to like be connected with their thoughts. On the other hand, I think it's such a powerful statement, and there's so many statements in there that it couldn't be lost. And for me, it was like, how can we still talk about it? How can we still showcase it? But like, what are your thoughts on, you know, like having the kind of 2.0 version of that concept? And I think you girls nailed it with D, you know.
And it was for us a key prompt from you, because you were like, okay, we need to start again. It has to be true to this new context.
Yeah, we were ready to like start 100% over.
Let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're like, no. You know, so that was, you know, for us working with you and alternative thinkers, a way for us to reimagine within the scope.
Which ended up being so much stronger because it was holding remnants of the broken system that, like, we're not going to ever completely see it go away immediately. It's not going to be erased, but it can be, like we say, intentionally dismantled, and it can be intentionally deconstructed, in making cracks and spaces and areas within for new life and new structures. So I think that prompt of like telling Dejha and I, like, maybe you can just work with what you have, ended up making such a stronger piece than we would have made if we started from the very beginning, blank slate.
I think that touches with you girls as well very well, and obviously all the other conversations we've had on, you know, what does that mean to have a virtual platform, which is obviously something like the other projects you have on the Alternative Thinkers, but, you know, having this physical, virtual, hand in hand, you know, and creating this like 360 experience around it, I think is beautiful, and that's very you. And that's what I think D will become. Yeah.
And since you mentioned Alternative Thinkers, for people who aren't familiar with it, can you just share what that's about? And we have 2 of our projects currently listed on there, including D.
Yes, indeed. I mean, very quickly, Alternative Thinkers, this is something I've been thinking about for quite a while. Basically, this is a new kind of online platform where creative minds, you know, set the framework and are then connected to funding. So the key thing for me was, there's a lot of talk, but there's not enough doing, and there's a lot of amazing alternative thinkers, but I just want to make sure that all of their projects or their amazing way of thinking just get produced. It's all about creating real change within structures and kind of reshifting priorities and having practical solutions. And I think the voice of the artists and designers and creative minds in general, because that's what you'll find on alternative thinkers, it's not just artists and designers. You have people coming from architecture, foods, technology, and research, and all of these people together, for me, will have the answers. That's where the real change will come from. That's what we launched 3 weeks ago now. Yeah,
it's so cool, and I think it raises such a good point. I think to some people who don't really understand artists and designers that well might think that like creative is like the opposite of practical, you know what I mean? But it's, if you tap into the creativity of people who imagine things and can think of things that they've never seen before and articulate them and come up with a way to foresee them, that's actually like how change will happen, not in the like practical sense, which is like using what's already there, looking at what's already been done. Like we do need innovation coming from artists and designers.
And what's groundbreaking about alternative thinkers is, and exactly what you were saying, which is the artist, the designer doesn't need to fit in within the construct and sort of the requirements and constraints of a brand, guideline of their current, marketing campaign, because that is limiting. There's only so much you can do in terms of shaking things up, and you can't design new systems within constraints like that. We were watching a live presentation the other day with Lev Manovich, who was like, of course, of course, it's nice to have even grants and institutions who, that we can create works that are, supported, but then also it's still fitting within a structure. And he was just like, he's like, I think it would just be better to be a full-on alien, because you're still having to abide by norms and constraints and checking, off boxes that maybe they're the right boxes, but maybe they're not complete. And so I think alternative thinkers, this new platform that you've created, will really allow for not having to serve and work within current systems, but design them from the ground up.
And it heroes the idea too.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important. Certain grants or institutional commissions, there's a bunch of other things you need to be able to like prove. And this idea of also like democratizing whose ideas are taken seriously, because not everyone is going to have the access or might not have the portfolio that demonstrates that they've had big funding and can pull off a big thing. Like we need people to take chances on who they give money to, not just, the people who are always getting it for everything anyway.
Who is qualified, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And under what criteria is someone qualified?
Ties back, I think, with what you said earlier about, if we lead with the idea, then obviously having a degree is great, but you don't have to. And I have another example with one of my friends the other day. I'm not going to name the brand, but they were looking for new ideas. And again, they were looking at RISD and all these, and he was like, well, why don't we just look on Instagram? Creative and idea that is going to enable to create change, not so much because you've been to a certain school or have a certain degree. I think that's the way that we're going to be able to bring lots of different minds and people on board, and whether it's in AI or whether it's in all the different industries, because there's a real problem there.
And as a curator, I think that you're in a really key position. I'd like to be the first to commission someone who is seeing potential and ignoring the kind of like prestige of like, oh, they already have this achievement, and like giving that person the chance to have that achievement is like going to be huge.
Well, so it's a safe move to say,
yeah,
well, you're qualified. And
yeah,
the criteria for being qualified is so biased because it starts when you're born, you know, and what environment you're born into. And if you are not offered a public education that is good as the rich neighborhoods, and so you fast forward and it's like, how on earth are you going to have a CV that, you know, matches up to a privileged, you know, person who might not even be deserving of all of the accolades that they have.
That's why I think you always see the same names popping over and over again, because you either play the safe side or you play the Google top 10 artist side, you know, and then there's that going on as well. Big names are great, and I'm not saying that they're not, but I'm much more interested in upcoming designers, because I think that's usually where the work is also the best, because you can really work, you know, with them and say, push yourself, you know, take some risk, and, you know, and you have that kind of structure to say, we here, you'll have the money, let's go wild, you know, which for me is it's so much more interesting. For me, there's no added value as a creator to just have a big name, because anyone can get that name, you know, versus really finding who's interesting, who's doing something different, who's challenging the norm at the moment, you know.
Do you feel like your process or curatorial approach is being changed at all by all the conversations happening right now around structural racism and Black Lives Matter, and how?
Yeah. No, you have to. I think you can't just say, you know, whatever was there before, like if you say, oh, I'm doing exactly the right thing, even though that was again top of mind before, I think it's even more top of mind now. I've had amazing conversation with Natse, you know, within our alternative thinkers, and it's our time as, again, a white female to listen and also to act.
Like, we are incorporating this knowledge into what we do and into our fields, because racism is not one thing that our Instagram activism is going to solve. It's going to actually start to get chipped away if people, like, we have friends in the beauty industry who, like, in the beauty industry is starting to dismantle it and question and challenge, in music, in art and design, or art and tech. So that's kind of, and then in your case as a curator, like, if we all don't stop, we just need to be active within our lives.
And this need to decolonize AI as well.
Widely cited that white men are overrepresented in the high-tech sector, and particularly working with AI. And there's also, at the same time that we know that AI is going to be determining a lot of how our future looks and how it operates and how it works. And so questions that I think technology and alternative thinkers and new systems need to be addressing: who is designing the future? Like, who has the privilege to design our future, and who is the future going to be serving, depending on who's designing it, and also who is that system working against because of who it's designed by.
Right.
So just getting more Black people, more women, more people of color in the designing process of these systems would actually make us able to have a future that reflects the people and not this tiny segment of the population.
We have access to resources to create new systems, and so, you know, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are
we have the power of choice. You know, we and that's what happens. We can choose who we partner with. We can choose the projects we want to work on, and all of that. Then that's how you will act. Even more so, I think brands and have to take a stand. You know, they have to stand for something, but they have to stand for something for the right reason. Like, does it really mean something? Are you really doing something?
But who's on your board?
Who's your highest paid creative director? Who's your CEO? You know, you can't have it both ways. So I think people really need to look at, you know, what they are doing and what is actually changing. the system outside of performing on social media.
But it was, you know, very similar to the way that I created for alternative thinkers. You know, obviously I reached out to you, I reached out to Daisy Ginsburg, to Lucy McRae, and all of you guys, and you were already so much into the future. There was no like, let's try to capitalize in what's going on. There was no like, oh yeah, no, I'm really thinking at the moment, I'm working hard on trying to find this solution. I'm working on this installation because of that. It's like, no, you were already working on it before. You're not trying to adapt to a situation in a moment in time and try to benefit from it. You know, that's, you have a vision, and as an artist, and you're doing it, you know. And I think for me, that's the key thing. Again, going back to having something meaningful and working with people that are passionate and about their work. That's what will create change. It's not people that suddenly are like, maybe there's something for me in there.
Yeah, maybe there's something for me in there. Oh my God, so true. And the timing of alternative thinkers is really interesting because it seems counterintuitive, but can you just speak to like why you think this is the right time for alternative thinkers?
It was the right time. Well, first of all, because I had the time to do it, and then also because I think, you know, more so than ever, people are willing to listen to what we have to say now. You know, I think before there was more of a nice to have. Yeah, we'll think about it. Whereas now it's much more, we need incremental change. You know, we need people to shake us up a little bit and give us some solutions. What can you change in the middle to long term? Because that's what I'm interested in. Change doesn't come quickly. You know, someone can click on something, but at the end of the day, it will take a while for people to actually implement it. And what I'm interested in is to create these sparks, you know, and with people like you girls and everyone within alternative thinkers, that's what I want to create, is these kind of sparks that will then lead to incremental change. So that's why it was the right time.
Yeah. And what's also nice is I feel like people were itching to like get back to normal early in the COVID days. Now with Black Lives Matter happening and us actually like seeing progress being made at this time, there's way less of, I think, a desire to go back to normal, and more people being like, no, normal wasn't that good. Here's all the shit that was going on in normal
normal was only good for
certain people.
For people, it was normal.
Exactly.
You know, who are benefiting from the normal. And so, and that's a small percentage of people.
And now it's like, I think there's going to be way more recognition that whatever the new normal becomes has to be drastically different and has to be open to change, like actually shaking up and changing systems that are not working and are not serving everybody.
And also the people who those systems were benefiting, what are they willing, what are we willing
to give up?
Because we are part of that. What are we willing to give up?
As crazy as it sounds, but we are in exciting time to change things.
So thank you for joining us, Anne.
Thanks, Anne. You're the best.
I think this is a good time.
Thank you, girls.
Good time to open up for questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we are live. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So we went from Ania and Dejha's video and Anne-Laure to sort of live CADAF platform. We have technology. Hello, and we are all in different places.
We tried to make it look convincing that it was
this
the
same moment.
Yeah, exactly. That it was a continuation. So I would like to remind our viewers that I am reading the chat. So if they want to ask you any questions on the chat, then I will obviously relay sort of the message. But I can maybe start with one because I have to say I was fascinated by your work that was originally called In Waiting. And I was wondering if at any point you actually thought that to keep it as it was originally conceived, and actually keep it as a sort of a memory of this time that we've just lived. Because you obviously said in your talk previously that you maybe felt that after this, which is nothing that we had experienced before, people might not want to go back and actually sit in the room alone. But what if that actually could have become sort of a moment of reflection and memory, i.e. let's not forget let's not repeat the same mistakes in a way. Have you ever, at any point, have you ever thought of keeping it that way?
100%. I think we all really wanted it to happen, and we were kind of all attached to the installation and just kind of dream about it actually existing. And there was that 3D model that was sitting next to us earlier. There was one day when Ania was like, you know what? I have a feeling that this is going to be the extent to the physical manifestation of this project. And we've had so much conversation between us and Anne and the team at ADO, which I see G. Michelle is logged in.
Yay, G. Michelle.
So she was part of the team to make that decision of whether, we thought critically, is this appropriate? Does this make sense? Are we missing an opportunity to go deeper? And I think ultimately, I feel like the concepts that we addressed in Waiting were more that they started with influence and more on a creative level of how it affects our creative practice as an artist and creative industry. But then we had already gone to how that affects us in our everyday lives and outside of creativity as well. And I think where D takes it is it escalates the issue to, this isn't just a creative problem. This isn't just, self-care. I mean, it is self-care, but it is self-care for the entire society and in our entire world community, because it's affecting us all. So I think we're actually just going deeper into the problem, although I do really wish there was a physical version of In Waiting. But Anne, what do you think?
No, I think it's the key thing for me was to keep it, but also just to evolve it, and have that, have still that essence of what you girls wanted to discuss and push forward, but also bring some new thoughts to it, so a new kind of layer. And I think that's what Dee is doing, and it's bringing more questions, which obviously I think that's what COVID has created. We're more into what's next, and I think you girls have really captured that with Dee, and having also, I found really interesting having a physical and digital side to that installation, which again is exactly how you girls think.
Yeah, and I think, Giulia, you bring up a really good point that just because we're in a different time, it doesn't mean that In Waiting isn't just as relevant. Because like we briefly touched on in our talk, just because people were inside and alone in their rooms doesn't mean they were achieving that boredom state. It doesn't mean that they actually were experiencing empty moments, that they were able to listen to their thoughts. So I think it actually is still relevant. And we even considered at the beginning, like, we might need this piece more than ever, because there's a difference between sitting and listening, to your own thoughts and just being still and being bored, doing absolutely nothing, and filling your moment in your room with every device and every form of stimulation possible. So it actually still was relevant, but we felt like maybe we still wanted to kind of add another layer to it with Dee, but it's still relevant, I think.
Yes, I have a question from Sean, which I'm going to read now. But no, absolutely. I actually think that with the idea of D, you also touch upon something that I think maybe we all feel, but I certainly feel that, that optimism and positivity now that we all want, and maybe create something new out of, what happened. So yes, in a way, I'm happy that you agree that, but the two that can coexist. They're sort of, now things that are born from the same idea.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's why we ultimately, D is, I mean, in waiting is in D.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it is a ruin of that project. And that was kind of a homage to how relevant we thought that was. And this idea of intentional deconstruction, taking what we want with us and discarding what no longer serves us. So in a way, it does live on. And so this is kind of sci-fi ruin of just this site for immersive thinking, where we can really drop into critical thinking of what new systems look like, but also acknowledge what has worked for us in the past.
I'll read out the question from Sean. So culturally, we seem locked into the deterministic idea that AI is the future. What's the precedent for this? Is there any other technology with such a long runway between speculation and fact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's kind of, you're right that it's like, how long have we been saying that is going to be the future, and like, when are we actually going to see it be the future? And I think the point that we're making is that whatever structures are going to be determining the future, whether AI is that driving force or it's not, is that the people who are architecting the systems, physical and digital, need to represent the people, and it needs to not be a small demographic designing the architectures that every person inhabits. So it's less a commentary, and we're not making a statement about whether AI is the future or not. It's just more about, there is speculation that it's going to be the future, and if it is, we need to have it done well and with a diverse group of people.
Well, and it's also the present. I don't even think it's so much about, I mean, it's going to, AI is going to continue to advance, but machines and AI are people by proxy. And so it reflects our design systems. I mean, the design systems that we live in today, even the more sort of physical versions of them, of how transportation works, how healthcare works, all of that is still designed, and AI is no different. It's just that what can happen, what a human can do in a second or a minute, AI can do in a fraction of a second, what the sort of designer has kind of laid out for it. So I see Sean just chimed in again that AI is just going to happen outside the exercise of our will. So it's not, we're not against AI. We're not, we are proponents of technology. I'm a huge proponent of ubiquitous computing and pervasive computing. And when back in like the 80s, when this was a fresh idea, before we started calling it Internet of Things, this was really meant to be a humanistic technology. It was meant to allow us to become more human, to be more present. But I think where we've seen technology go and how it has manifested in our day-to-day lives has been really done the opposite, and it's really just nagging us, requiring and demanding our attention at every moment, and actually doing the opposite of what the original intent of ubiquitous computing was. So I think the same can apply to AI. It's technology isn't neutral, it's what we apply to that technology.
And on that note of technology not being neutral, Nina and Lauren, hi, I know them, are saying it is already the future due to algorithms. And I think this is an important point to make, that algorithmic bias is well documented, and there's really good work being done by the Algorithmic Justice League to address this. So I think it's not so much the what of AI, but it's more the how and the who that's designing AI and all the technologies that are kind of affecting how our world is working.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction, that AI is going to continue to change and be different in the future, but right now it's happening in it's happening in every moment of our life.
Yeah.
And especially in surveillance technologies. And I don't know if you
She should
want to
take
jump
the
in
next
there.
question about the screen as a curator. That's interesting.
Oh,
And then we
Yeah, I was thinking the same. I was going to say, oh, maybe Anne-Laure can jump into this as well.
yes.
Okay, you have to read it out to me because I closed the other one.
Of course, I will. This comes from Paul. Given your interest in and use of technology in your work, so given your interest in the use of technology in your work, I'd love to hear more about your view of the screen as both a medium and a subject for artistic exploration.
Well, girls, do you want to start and then I continue on that? I think just on the AI point, there's also something that you girls always say, and we discussed a lot about that also yesterday, but the, you break structures by having ideas and by leading by creative ideas, and that's how, you're gonna, it's not so much about technology when you're, but it's also like, how do you create something else? If you try to kind of stay within the same structures, that's when you struggle a bit to retrofit that technology with the human side. Whereas if you're pushing boundaries, and that's and try to not acknowledge structures, that's when I think like real innovation happens. But yeah, do you want to start with the screens? Because obviously you girls have a strong point of view on that, and then I'll
do. Which is ironic right now, because our practice for a while now has we've done everything we can to get out of the screen, right? And
even though the work is digital.
Though the work is digital. And then there's this kind of idea of this, sort of expected aesthetic of digital art, or this expected aesthetic of what is digital. And visible technology doesn't equal high-tech technology. We kind of feel that it implies the opposite, right? So the moment we see a screen, it feels kind of retro to us. And not to say it's not a valuable medium. We create films. There's projects in our virtual booth here at CADAF that is very much rectangles and video playing within rectangles. So it's not to say that we don't value or create within that medium, but we are very interested in taking technology out of the virtual sort of world and interact with virtual worlds with no virtual layer, right? And having a physicality. Our last project on View was really a complex network of technology, a la the ubiquitous computing type of format and medium, where it was all physical computing, facial recognition, ways to interact with a digital world without seeing any screen. So yeah.
So we think, it's great, but I think we also, there's so much to explore, especially in digital, beyond the screen, that we're excited to see how it kind of gets like broken open and turned into other forms we haven't thought of or seen yet.
In both art and also
in the world.
In the world, because I think we would all have some relief to not be in the screen all the time. And it's, what's ironic is that another project that we're working on with alternative thinkers is very screen-based, and it's very device-based. And for us, it's just, there's so many other physical computing elements that can tie in, but it's funny because we've done so much to go in the other direction. And we're like, okay, let's go back to the screen. I guess we'll have to readdress that.
Yeah, but I think what is interesting is you're bringing your touch to that. It's not the literal kind of, like you said, just looking at the screen and just being completely passive. I think what you've managed to create with that virtual platform is the new version of that is so participative, and you have a different experience than what you would experience live, which is I think one of the key issues right now. Everybody's trying to any kind of platform, and obviously that's very apropos at the moment with what's going on in fashion and so on, but everybody I think is taking a lot of videos and they just put the videos on the platform, and then with e-commerce, and then you're done, and it's like, well, no, I'm sure you can push this a little bit more. And I think what you've created with that virtual platform is creating completely new network of, you know, different entities and how to experience online. And again, so that I think fits with your vision. You know, obviously, even though you have a very strong point of view on what this is, but yeah, it's a different take, which I think will be really interesting to create.
Mm-hmm.
We have about sort of 5 minutes left, so I wonder if maybe I'll go. I don't see any. There is a very interesting discussion on the chat.
I see that.
It opened up like a sort of a big discussion, but I don't see any direct sort of questions for you. But I was thinking, how do you think sort of this time has, if you can, if you do know at this point, how do you think that the last few months that we've experienced have changed or influenced your approach to your work? Or has it given you talked a little bit at the beginning about inspiration, and it's not something that you can just be like, oh, you know, find anywhere. But, you know, it's, yes, and I agree with you, but I was wondering if this time has given you something more, a different look at your work for the future.
I feel like the virtual platform that we're working on with alternative thinkers is something that was definitely driven by our inability to work in our normal medium, which is large scale physical installations that incorporate the human body and performance and someone being in a physical space, which has been, even though the work is digital, kind of as fleshy and physical as possible. So obviously when it was like, okay, there might not be events for a year and a half, and Dejha and I thinking about, okay, how are we going to create something with those same kind of effects and all of those nuances, but without being able to have people in public spaces, is when we started thinking about virtual experiential. And then if you want to talk about just like the lack of tools and how that led into our next project.
Well, first, I think, and we, as Anne said in the pre-recorded Q&A that we had, this isn't something that we kind of jumped on because of the kind of world state. I think it got more fine-tuned and it redirected the medium a bit, but it feels very much a continuation of what we were already doing. All of Ania and I's work is site-specific. So if we create a work like On View that is in a museum, for us, it feels like a site-specific work because people are going to a museum to experience art, right? So they're already in a particular mindset when they go in. So we're very used to, in our practice, thinking about creating a work based on the sort of psychological and emotional state that someone is entering into the work. So I don't feel that that approach very much changes in our current practice, but it is definitely a response to where everyone is. And
if people are at home or in their room and they haven't left, then we would create kind of for the context of where everyone is at that moment. And we like to say the work isn't just physically site-specific, but also emotionally site-specific. We create work for nightlife context. So if we know, okay, everyone's hanging out and they're drinking and they're doing this, like we're gonna make something very different, knowing that that's the mindset of people versus something in a museum. So like that is a big part of our process. And I think in this time, just considering what the effects of all these changes are having on everyone, that's kind of adding to another dimension of the emotional site specificity of anything that we're creating now is in this context and responding to this context.
Thank you. That's I mean, that's very interesting actually, that it basically hasn't changed the core of what you want to do or you want to achieve with your art, but effectively almost it's given you another dimension where it's added to another, say, tool, because now and in the future, do you think you'll keep both? sorry, Anne-Laure, if you wanted to jump in, I'm just gonna
no, let the girls talk.
keeping an eye also on the time. But do you think you'll keep both the physical? Hopefully, we'll go back to also experiencing art in the physical, but then also the virtual.
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, still we're always working in the virtual, usually more in a physical manifestation. So we will continue to work with that regardless. However, what's really interesting for us is that the world is taking virtual more seriously. You know, it's always been sort of an add-on, or well, let's just have the live stream version of the physical thing. And it wasn't really taken seriously as a true medium of expression and connection. And it always kind of seemed second best. And I think because it was dealt with so frivolously, that kind of reflects how far we got with how expressive these tools can be. So one thing that has really changed in our practice is, to answer that specifically, is that we feel that there aren't enough tools for creatives and thinkers to architect and develop virtual works or speak in that sort of, or be literate in that sort of medium.
And experiences and online spaces. Like when we were all of a sudden only inhabiting virtual spaces, we were like, our options are like
business tools,
Zoom and like business tools, and then predatory like data extracting apps. Like where, like it was almost like, where can we go that is like safe and creative? And so when we were forced to do that because we couldn't get those needs met out in the world, we were like, there's a giant gap here. And that's something that we're now actively working on filling in terms of tools and spaces that are meant for artists and creatives to create and connect to people outside of predatory systems.
Right, and in a more expressive way.
Yeah.
You know, because there's also, not everyone, you know, can work with or knows how to work with a team of engineers to create a really complex platform so that they can create their message. That takes significant resource. It takes significant...
Which CADAF did so well, by the way.
Yes. And CADAF did a really wonderful job of creating a sense of place. And that is something that is really lacking in the virtual space, of how do we conduct a feeling that we are in the same space. And I think over the past few days, we've seen people coming in, you know, Nina or, you know, Giulia and kind of Sean, and, you know, there's these familiar faces that we've been seeing, and it feels like we've been at this fair together. And I think this is a really good step forward to show it. It's a first step, and it's a great first step, and it has been very effective and powerful. So it's been great to be a part of this as well. But
we're running out of time.
Oh yeah. So
sorry,
I didn't use the period in the sentence.
I could feel it, but really quick, Sean, absolutely. And we're looking at gaming because
yes, game flow, game theory. Yes, that's a whole other talk. Sean, we should do that talk together sometime.
Yes, at the next CADAF also. Let's continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you both
so
of you being here. Thank you, Anne-Laure. Thank you everyone for participating. And goodbye. And we're ready for the next panel.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.